Hello, my name is Danielle, and I am the Education Specialist here at the Turning Point Rape Crisis Center. I am so glad that you joined us today. Today, we're going to be starting a brand new series. In light of current events, we feel like we have to make a statement and be able to educate people on racism, and so we have started a brand new series. This series is called The Isms, and so this series is called The Isms. So we are going to be talking about racism, sexism, elitism, classism, ableism over the next few weeks, and starting with racism. So at the Turning Point, we want everybody to be educated about systematic racism and its effects. And so more specifically today, we're going to be talking about how racism affects sexual violence. So let's get started. Okay, so it takes you, Nati, a bystander's guide on being empowered and educated, because once we're educated about the problem, we can be the change to fix it and support survivors along the way. We are the Turning Point. If you have found us, we are the Turning Point Rape Crisis Center of Collin County, and we serve survivors in all different places, and we do our best to be always there and supporting and providing resources, etc. So we have a 24-hour crisis hotline that is available rain, shine, holiday, 3 a.m., 3 p.m., where you can call and get all your questions answered about sexual violence and getting involved with counseling and so on. And that brings me to my next point. We offer 110% free counseling for survivors of sexual violence and their friends and family members. Next, we have advocacy. So we send advocates into the hospital and into our very own clinic where we support survivors during their sexual assault nurse examination. They get an exam and we will provide resources. We'll let them know their rights and overall just support them and get them plugged in with counseling and so on and so forth, doing everything we can to support that survivor. And then lastly is this, education. We go into the community and to different schools and different events to be able to spread awareness about sexual violence and provide primary prevention so that we can end this heinous crime and this heinous problem. So our mission is to highlight the impact of sexual violence on individuals and our mission is to highlight the impact of sexual violence on our community. Our mission is to highlight the impact of sexual violence on individuals in our community through education programs that foster hope, encourage change, and prevent sexual violence. Join us in the fight against sexual violence. The Turning Point is committed to reducing the prevalence of sexual violence in our community. We firmly believe that for this change to occur, each person has a responsibility and must do their part to prevent sexual violence. So, our topic for today, racism. We are going to talk about racism and how it correlates with sexual violence. And so we're going to be providing history. There are going to be a lot of statistics and a lot of research studies. So feel free, if I start going too fast, to pause it and make sure to share this with your friends and family members. We have to treat racism like a disease. And you have to assume, like, maybe I have it, or maybe someone I know may have it, and needs these resources and this education to be able to squash that, because we want this problem to end because of its correlation with sexual violence. So, and also just because racism is awful. But okay, so let's get started. So, the definition of racism is a belief that race is the primary determinant of human traits and capacities, and that racial differences produce an inherent superiority of a particular race. So sexual violence and the isms. So discussions about intersecting identities, oppression, and social justice have been a part of anti-violence movements for a long time. Many movement members have adopted a framework of discussing the continuum of sexual violence within the context of oppression and isms. what our series is about. The same attitudes and behaviors that allow for sexual violence in our culture are reinforced and rooted in sexism, racism, ableism, ageism, and more. And we're going to get into that over the next few weeks with our series, and especially today. So, the likelihood that a person will experience interpersonal violence, which includes sexual violence, relationship violence, and stalking, increases if they are Black, Brown, or Native American. Okay? So, now we're going to get into some statistics. 3.5 in 10 white non-Hispanic women reported victimization in their lifetime. The rate increased to 4 in 10 for Native, Black, and Hispanic women, and 5 in 10 for women who identified as multiracial, so Black and white, Hispanic and white, Hispanic and Black, Hispanic and Native American. That rate goes up. So, more statistics. These are going to be for men. So when you look at the prevalence rates for men by race and ethnicity, the disparities are even more pronounced. So while 2.5 in 10 white non-Hispanic men reported victimization, 4 in 10 Native American men, and 3.5 in 10 Black men, and 3 in 10 Hispanic men, and 4 in 10 men who identified as multiracial identified a history of violent victimization in their lifetimes. Now, feel free to pause during these statistics because they are a tongue twister for me, but they are also earth-shattering to look at. And it's important to know these statistics because sometimes we can think, oh, this isn't a real problem. Oh, it's a problem, but it only affects a few people. When you look at that, 4 in 10 Native American men, that's so many. That's 40%. That's almost half. And so we have to be looking at this, and we have to be really honest with the statistics and what it's showing, okay? So, next statistic, over half, 53% of all African American study participants indicated rape victimization, and 44% reported sexual coercion within their lifetime, with approximately 42% reporting both. And that was the National Sexual Violence Resource Center's research study in 2016. I really want you to sit with this and think about this. Even as the day goes on, as the weeks go on, I want you to really think about these numbers. Over half of all African American participants indicated that they had been raped. That number is astronomical. So, in their 2013 applied research paper, Caroline West and Camilla Johnson provided a critical review of the research on sexual violence in the lives of African American women. They discussed community-based samples of Black women where prevalence rates of child sexual abuse was extremely high. So 34.1% of Black women in a Boston study had been affected by child sexual abuse. 59% among Black female veterans were affected by child sexual abuse, and 65% of Black women in a Chicago study had been affected by child sexual abuse. These numbers are humongous. So, studies that focused on lifetime experiences of sexual violence victimization found that approximately 1 in 5 Black women had been raped, and that specific characteristics and identities can increase the risk of experiencing sexual violence. So West and Johnson described high prevalence rates in studies among Black women who were low income, HIV positive, incarcerated, or bisexual, for instance. Due to social inequalities, including racism, people of color are more likely to experience barriers in accessing safe housing, quality education, and adequate employment. Just one of these experiences increases risk of experiencing sexual violence. More often, though, they happen together. The more risk factors a person has, the greater the risk for sexual violence. So that kind of ties it all in on how this number gets so high and how we have so many people affected by this. So now we're going to get into some history, okay? Because a lot of times our history doesn't fully paint a full picture of the truth of our history. And there's so many things that you can look up now and be able to find resources and education about. So we're going to touch on some of that today. So sexual violence as a tool of racist oppression. So the enslavement of Black African people by white invaders set the stage for racist oppression in the United States. Black women were commonly raped and impregnated during the passage to the Americas. It was also common and widely accepted practice for white slave owners to rape their slaves. Children born of rape of Black women were considered property of the rapist and could be bought and sold as slaves. So as a nation, we would like to believe that these times of intense racial discrimination are behind us, but that is not the case. Still today, we see the after effects of discrimination cemented in our legal structures because of a foundation built on slavery and Jim Crow. In 2016, the trial of Daniel Holtzclaw brought the issue of sexualized violence as a tool of racist oppression to the forefront of national conversations. Holtzclaw was accused and convicted of using his power and privilege as a police officer to rape and intimidate Black women in the community he served. Many women came forward and described in detail his racially motivated crimes. Time and time again, we see these stereotypical representations play out in media coverage and public commentary about people of color who are victimized. Deep-seated racial stereotypes influence our perceptions and victim-blaming opinions. This often happens subconsciously because of internalized racism that we all experience, even within communities of color. It is also common for racial stereotypes to be used in political discourse as justification for harmful and discriminatory practices. For example, tropes discriminating all Mexicans as criminals and rapists are used to justify anti-immigrant policies. For decades, law enforcement agencies have used stereotypes about people of color as inherently violent or criminal to justify the use of racial profiling and stop and frisk practices. Racism and sexual violence are intimately connected. Sexual violence has historically been and continues to be used as a tool of oppression against communities of color. Deeply rooted beliefs and stereotypes about communities of color serve as justification for sexualized violence and systematic oppression. Social conditions and experiences of communities of color have also translated into higher rates of victimization. At the same time, people of color face distinct barriers and challenges to accessing mainstream victim services. Victim service programs have an obligation to explore these connections and work to dismantle systems of oppression and bias that perpetrate sexual violence and racism. So with that ends my presentation, but we want to have this conversation about racism, especially in this time where the curtain is being dropped and people feel like they can conversate about this because everybody is wanting education and wanting resources, and everybody is being able to see this issue that has been so deeply ingrained in our society for so long, and so many people have been blind to it, but now they're being enlightened and being able to see. And so during this time, if you feel a sense of uncomfortableness or wanting to not look at the issue and just wishing things would go back to normal, imagine how that feels for people of color. Imagine how that feels for people who experience this on a daily, like in their daily life. As a Black woman, I experienced racism in my daily experience of life, and I graduated high school in 2014. And so we have to look at ourselves and even if, let's say, we aren't racist, we should be able to be vocal about anti-racist. We don't want to just aim for not racist. We want to our goal is to be anti-racist. We don't want to be complacent and say, oh, well, it's not my business or anything like that. We want to be world changers, because that's something that I talk about so often, is what you permit, you promote. And so you have to be the change, because change starts with you. It doesn't start with your neighbor. It starts with you, because you are the change that you want to see in this world. You choose how you show up in the day. You choose how you get to interact with people and how you get to educate people. Now is not the time to have people in your life who, are have stereotypes in their head about people of color, and for you to just be like, oh, just that's just how they are, because we have to change those behaviors. We have to educate and love on people and like gently know the truth and the history and the statistics. So feel free to share this video with your family and friends. Feel free to spread the word and spread awareness about sexual violence and racism and oppression and systematic racism. We want to be able to have these conversations and not shy away from them. We want to be able to face this head on, because until we're able to face the problem head on, we will never fix it. And so I thank you for watching this presentation today. I hope that you gained something. If you ever have any questions revolving around sexual violence, call our crisis hotline. For any resources revolving around racism, as it correlates to sexual violence, we will be providing different resources on our Facebook, on our Instagram. We always try and share resources. Also, if you are fighting for justice in this time, if you are, using your voice and speaking a bunch, that can also be very taxing on you mentally, and it could be exhausting. And so make sure to take care of yourself in this time as well. Write down some of your favorite things to do to relax, some things that bring you joy, and some days just turn off your phone and tune into those things that make you happy and give you peace, because we all want to fight for social change and social justice. And to do that, we have to make sure that we pour into ourselves. So make sure to pour into yourself, love on yourself, and then fight for justice for others. With that, I will see you next Thursday at 10 a.m. for our next presentation. And I hope to see you there and that you share your friends. I challenge you to tell at least 10 friends about this presentation and be a change. So I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day, and I'll see you next week. Bye.